today we are going, and the key to learning neuroanatomy is to learn your pathways. And so you have a handout that has all of these pathways on here. And this is going to be fast somatosensory for the body, slow somatosensory for the body, and fast and slow somatosensory for the head. Once again, fast and slow somatosensory will not be a complete answer for the test. You must list what fast and slow somatosensory are, which we covered in the spinal cord lecture. Okay, so you need to learn these pathways, and then I'm going to make this a bit smaller so that it'll fit on the screen while I have the board visible. And of course, you're not going to be able to see any of this on the screen, but that's why you have it on your pathway, on your handout. And here's just a reminder of the 4 questions that we went over in the spinal cord lecture for every tract. There's an associated 4 questions for all of the nuclei that you're going to learn in this class. Don't try to memorize the answers for each of these questions for every tract and every structure. It's too much. You can't do it. But once you learn your pathways, you can then refer to your pathway and you'll be able to answer all of these questions. So that's the way to go about studying for this class. All right, so as I said, we're going to go over the pathways for fast and slow somatosensory information for the body and fast and slow somatosensory information for the head. This is also on your handout. And we already went over the structures labeled on this thoracic section of the spinal cord. So this will be a practice for you to do on your own, to look at the pathways here. You're in the spinal cord, and you need to know what each of these pathways are, as well as this nucleus. And the main thing we're going to emphasize today is the process for this information to get to cortex and conscious awareness. So review from a previous lecture the basic pathway for sensory systems. You have a primary sensory afferent that originates in the periphery. It sends its axon in and makes a first synapse in a pre-thalamic relay nucleus. This higher order neuron will then send its axon, in this case immediately across the midline, and ascend in another tract to a thalamic relay nucleus. And then that highest order neuron or higher order neuron is going to send, in the thalamus, is going to send its axon up through the primary cortex for that particular sensation. So review that general pathway that we already went over. All right, so this is a practice for you guys to do on your own because that's already been done in the spinal cord lecture. So we're going to ascend to a more superior section. And of course, the first question when you see a section is, where am I? And I'm going to be asking questions. If you don't know the answers right away, pause your video, refer back to the material from previous lectures that let you know the answer to that question, and then turn your video back on. Okay, so the first question is, where are we? Well, there are landmarks. Here's one landmark. Here's another landmark. If you don't know what those are, pause your video and review. These are the pyramids. These are the inferior olivary nuclei, and that tells us what level of the spinal cord. Pause if you need to look it up. That means we are in the medulla. Okay, so we now have to be somewhere in this region. Are we in the inferior regions of the medulla or the superior regions of the medulla? pause if you need to. Here is our fourth ventricle. And it's so teeny tiny you can't even really see it on this section. You'll have to look in your atlas to see the marking. It is so small it is now continuous with the central canal. So if we have a tiny fourth ventricle, that means we are in inferior regions of the medulla. So now you can refer to your pathway handout, and in inferior regions of the medulla, we're going to need to find the dorsal column nuclei for fast somatosensory information on its way to conscious awareness. And then we're going to need to find the internal arcuate fibers as this information crosses the midline. And we need to find the medial lemniscus. So for fast somatosensory, that's what we need to find. For slow somatosensory, this is nice and easy. You're going to like slow somatosensory for the body in the brainstem. All you got to do is find the anterolateral system. Okay, and then new information. We have slow somatosensory information for the head at this level. We need to find the spinal or descending nucleus and tract of the trigeminal system. Okay, so let's go ahead and find them on our section. And the dorsal column nuclei are located right here. And we've got nucleus gracilis as well as nucleus cuneatus. And I'll write all these names up on the board in just a moment. But what's going on here is we've got our fasciculus cuneatus, the last little bit of that dorsal column tract, ending here to make a synapse in nucleus cuneatus. And we also have synapses in nucleus gracilis. And so this is the pre-thalamic relay nucleus for fast somatosensory information from the body. And all of these fibers sweeping around here, those are our internal arcuate fibers. So these neurons are sending their axons across the midline, where they will then ascend up to the thalamus, specifically ventroposterolateral nucleus, and we'll get to that when we get to thalamus, don't panic. And then the lower body will also send its fibers up first across the midline and those internal arcuate fibers to the medial lemniscus, which is located right here. And then that information is going to ascend all the way to the thalamus. Okay, so nucleus gracilis is handling fast somatosensory information for the lower body. Nucleus cuneatus is handling this information for the upper body. And I drew this very carefully such that the upper body is represented more posterior in the medial lemniscus, and the feet are down here more anterior. So you can think of this as a headless, because remember this is just the body, a headless homunculus, which is the map of the body plan, standing on the pyramids. All right, so let's get some of these things written down for you. So we're covering fast somatosensory information from the body, so that is all of the ones up there. We have our dorsal or posterior, same thing, column nuclei, specifically nucleus gracilis and nucleus I didn't spell that right. Cuneatus. And then those fibers are sweeping across in the internal arcuate fibers to form the medial lemniscus. So those are the structures. Now we have to know the laterality. And the laterality always has a point of reference, 2 points of reference actually. And the first point of reference is going to be for the structure that is circled. So let's do this for the posterior column nuclei right up here. This is our first point of reference. Then the second point of reference is going to be for the questions listed here. Where did this information originate? All right, so question 1 is, we're talking about a nucleus as the modality, so we know we're talking about fast somatosensory information for the body. And the structure is the dorsal column nuclei, so that's right here, look on your handout. And the question is going to be, where did this information originate? And the way you answer that question is looking at this handout. We're talking about this nucleus right here, and here is where the information originates with the primary sensory afferent out in the periphery of the body. So when you're asking about the laterality for this nucleus right here, that information originated on the ipsilateral side, because here's our midline, of the body. So the answer up here for laterality for the dorsal column nuclei is going to be ipsilateral. All right, what about the internal arcuate fibers? Well, we can again look at our chart, and that's where they're crossing. So the laterality is going to be crossing. And finally, we have our medial lemniscus, 1C, up there on the section. And if we're talking about these fibers right here, and the question is, where did that information originate? The answer is going to be in the contralateral body. So we're right here, and the information started on the other side of the midline, so it will be contralateral. And that is the questions here. So the modality is going to be, for all of these, fast somatosensory. Now let's go ahead and finish up with the medial lemniscus. And the question will be, where are the cell bodies of these axons? Well, the cell bodies of these axons are in the contralateral dorsal column nuclei. Did these axons right here in the medial lemniscus, did they cross the midline? Yes, yes indeed they did. And then the next question is going to be, what are the target of these axons? Well, these axons are going to head to the ipsilateral thalamus, specifically ventroposterolateral nucleus. So those are, you can read the answers to all of these questions off of this chart. Okay, now we're going to do an aside where I mentioned in the spinal cord that it's important for proprioceptive information, so that's some of our fast somatosensory information, to make it to the cerebellum. So we've got proprioception on its way to cerebellum. And for the lower body, we already covered that. The primary sensory afferent is going to send a collateral to nucleus dorsalis, or dorsal nucleus of Clark, same thing. And then that higher order neuron is going to send its axon up through the posterior spinocerebellar tract. And that's how proprioceptive information for the lower part of the body is going to get to cerebellum. But what about the upper part of the body? And that's going to happen right here at this level. So just to get you oriented, because this might be hard to see on the video, we're going to draw the collateral from this axon right here, and it's going to go to the accessory or lateral cuneate nucleus. So that's going to be a collateral branch, and then this higher order neuron is going to send its axon through this structure to cerebellum. Not only that, we also have that proprioceptive information from the lower body that used to be in the dorsal spinocerebellar tract, which happily was located in about this same region, so that'll help you find them. And so that's the proprioceptive information for both upper and lower body, and we're going to call this the inferior cerebellar peduncle. Your atlas calls it the restiform body. We're not going to worry about that name. It's the same axons, some of them coming from the posterior spinocerebellar tract, plus these axons now joining from the lateral cuneate nucleus, and they're going to run into the inferior cerebellar peduncle. And the nucleus here is our lateral cuneate nucleus. So the lateral cuneate is completely analogous to that dorsal nucleus of Clark, or nucleus dorsalis. So nucleus dorsalis is for proprioception of the lower body to cerebellum. Lateral cuneate nucleus is for proprioception from the upper body to cerebellum. And these pathways are both ipsilateral all the way. They never cross the midline before it gets to cerebellum. Okay, so that's our aside just to finish up our proprioceptive information to cerebellum. And now let's go ahead and move on to our slow somatosensory information from the body. So what do we need to find? We need to find the anterolateral system. Turns out that's this circle right here. Anterolateral system is super easy. It doesn't change. All the way through the brainstem, it's going to be the same answers to these questions as you had in the spinal cord. So be sure to review all of that information. Okay, we're in this inferior portions of the medulla. There's one more thing we have to find, and that's the pathway for slow somatosensory information from the head. Oh, goodness, I didn't fill this in on the board, which I should have. Slow somatosensory information from the body is running in the anterolateral system. And is this information originating in the ipsilateral body or the contralateral body? Pause if you need to. It is coming from the contralateral side of the body. Okay, so now we'll move on to that last system we need to find for our slow somatosensory system in the head, and that is located right here. Here's the tract. Here's the nucleus, so the descending or spinal tract and nucleus of the trigeminal system. And trigeminal, that should have been a 5. That makes it a little bit easier. You've got your primary afferent with its cell body in a ganglion. And which ganglion do you suppose that's going to be? The trigeminal system. So yes, indeed, that's going to be in the trigeminal nerve. And that axon's going to descend in this tract and then make its first synapse right here in the nucleus. And then a higher order neuron is going to cross the midline. I'm going to erase these to get them out of our way. And that higher order neuron is going to send its axons across the midline to ascend in the ventro-trigeminothalamic tract. And this is also going to go all the way up to thalamus, to the ventroposterolateral nucleus. All right, let's get that on the board. So, structure 5A. On this, yikes. Okay. That should be 5B so that we can stay consistent. Sorry. So we've got two 5Bs on this section. The first 5B is going to be the nucleus and tract of the spinal, or descending, same thing, nucleus and tract of the trigeminal system. And then our second 5B is these higher order neurons that are crossing the midline to ascend in the ventro-trigeminal thalamic tract. So let's make this a little bit clearer by making it, this is VTT, and this is the descending nucleus and tract. But that's all slow somatosensory information heading on up to the thalamus. Okay, so be sure to answer these questions for all of the nuclei and tracts, but we'll just practice right now with one of them. So we'll do VTT. So this is a tract that's located just lateral to the medial lemniscus. Remember, we're bilaterally symmetrical, so I didn't draw it in, but here's the other medial lemniscus in this section. Just lateral to that is the ventro-trigeminothalamic tract. Okay, where is that on our diagram? Right here. So now let's answer all of our questions for this tract. Okay, modality of the VTT. Well, that's going to be slow somatosensory information for the head. Cell bodies. Where are the cell bodies of these axons right here? They're in the contralateral spinal or descending nucleus of the trigeminal system. All right. Do these axons cross the midline? Absolutely, they do. And they cross right at the level of where your cell body is. That axon crosses the midline and then ascends in VTT. And what is the target of this axon? The target of this axon is going to be ventroposteromedial nucleus. That was a mistake. This does not go to VPL. This goes to VPM because this is the information for the head. And when we get to thalamus, you'll see, we'll show you both VPM and VPL. If I had a class in here live, they would have corrected me. Unfortunately, I don't. But VTT, the target, that's the beauty of the pathway, it will correct you. VTT goes to the ventroposteral medial nucleus of the thalamus. Okay, so at this point, what you should do is using, and look at it carefully, your pathways diagram as well as the post-it notes. Go ahead and review what we just did on section 611 as well as 6.5, 6.3, 6.5?
It was 5.
6.5, and review all these structures. Make sure you can draw them yourself. Once your hand knows where these structures are, that's a new way to get that information to cortex. So you're bringing that information in through proprioceptive movements, and it will help you learn it. So please review all of these structures, be able to answer the questions for each of the structures using your pathways diagram. And once you're comfortable with these two sections, then go ahead and watch the next lecture segment.